Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Giants. I am John Schmeelk. You might not know the face of the man I'm talking to, but you've heard his voice on our program many times before. He's usually a guest on Big Blue Kickoff Live around this time, but we decided to do the Giants Huddle this year because it's such a big time year for skill position guys in this draft, one of the best skill position drafts I can remember. He is Matt Waldman, who's the author of the Scouting RSP. Matt, it's good to talk to you, my man, and congratulations on having the book out. And I forgot to check how long it was this year. What did you check in terms of total pages?
1183. So
Out of your
if
mind.
that, yeah, if it scares you when you hear that for four positions, just understand it's really well bookmarked as a PDF, and you kind of get to choose your own adventure as far as how you do it. You just get as much depth as you want to have. And if you want the executive summary, it's in there too.
Yeah, absolutely. So what Matt does every year is that he takes quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends. He does rankings, and I love how you have the preface to every one of your rankings that rankings stink, but I do them anyway because people want them. But more importantly, it's really broken down into different qualities and skills and traits in each position group. And you can really dive into these players in a really deep way. And what I appreciate about the book, Matt, is your rankings are different. And that doesn't mean they're going to be right, but it means that they're different because it shows that you do your own work. And I think whenever you see people whose rankings are different, it shows that they do their own work in their own way and they come to different conclusions. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. That happens to all of us. None of us are perfect. But just talk about your process a little bit before we get into exactly where you have some of these players that maybe are different from us, from some other people.
Sure. Back in the day before I started this, my background was in operations and quality management. I worked for a company that had about 70 branches across the United States and 10,000 employees. And I was responsible for implementing a lot of process improvement measures that I got certified for. The company was actually based in New Jersey. So I used to go up there on a regular basis. And I learned the certification process, and because I was into fantasy football, and I was this latchkey kid growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, who used to skip school, and I'd plan my skip days by going to the library to read books about football players from the 1930s to the 1960s. So I was always like a special weird case at that point. But I realized one day after listening to Gil Brandt talk about Brian Westbrook, and why he wouldn't be a top 5 pick, but why he could be worth a top 5 pick, that I understood the NFL in a way from an organizational standpoint, and I wanted to learn how, and I had the tools to learn how to evaluate players, or at least evaluate performance. So I thought I'd apply that to football, and I could continue to grow this process. So what it is best practices from other industries applied to evaluating talent. And so when I do that, one of the things that I've always realized because of my background was that the only way you're going to get better is have a process that is consistent, continuously improving, and also that your process is your North Star, is your compass, because you can't listen to anybody else because you don't know where they were coming from for whether they were right or wrong. You've got to learn from your mistakes. So, over the years, I've certainly had some big calls and I've had some big mistakes. I've been someone who's been able to say, I've written a Patrick Mahomes scouting report that I can take to my grave and be proud of because I've had somebody tell me chief scouts overheard the combines. If they ever meet Matt Waldman, they're giving him a big hug. And if you read my scouting report I have available at mattwaldman.rsp.com on Patrick Mahomes, it reads like I knew the future. I mean, I know that sounds kind of not very modest, but I'm proud of that report. On the other hand, I've looked at players and said I didn't think Demaryius Thomas would be worth really anything as a starter in the league. I've missed on Blaine Gabbert, and had to learn some big lessons on guys like that. I recently, I thought Hakeem Butler was going to be a huge player, but that also helped me learn a lot with wide receivers and A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Reed, a lot, Cooper Kupp, a lot of players I did end up hitting on. But you don't have those big hits without learning from your big misses. And sometimes you have to learn the difference between when to change what you're doing and and when to hold the course and know that some of these things may be outside your purview. It could be that they didn't want to work. They didn't get fit with the right scheme. And maybe the GM wanted this guy, but the coach is like, no, I'm going to fatten this tight end up and make him be an inline blocker. And we know at 6'4", 250, that's not really his gig. But our offense doesn't need that. But the GM was so sold on him. Now I'm going to prove that GM wrong. I've literally had scouts write me and go, you have no idea how often that happens in the league, where there's like basically a match of wills between two employees, high level employees, basically saying, "Oh, you're going to give me this guy. I'm going to show you why he doesn't fit in what I do. So next time you're going to do what I'm asking you."
That's why you need buy-in, right, in the draft room. That's why, right now, the Giants, right upstairs from where I'm sitting, they're having their draft rooms. All the scouts are here. The coaches are now involved. Joe Shane, the general manager, everyone else in the department. And you need to have agreement on a player, right? The scouting staff might love a player. If the coaches don't, you give him to the coaches. They don't know how to use him. It's not going to work. So I think you make a really good point. Before we get started, Matt, I want to make sure tell the fans where they can find your RSP real quick.
Sure. MattWaldman.com. It's $21.95. You get a pre-draft that will give you a couple years, maybe 3 years of evergreen material, especially even if you're in a fantasy league. It's one of the two most purchased draft guides, even by like NFL people who, like recruiter Alex Brown at Ole Miss and used to be recruiting director at SMU last year, would say, he knows what people come into the door with. And this is one of the two most purchased draft guides for that. And then there's a post draft that is really fantasy focused. And I'm a senior staff writer for footballguys.com, been writing about fantasy football since 2003. So try and give you the best of both worlds, but it's rooted in real football and real process evaluation.
Yeah, and
Waldman.com. Yeah.
Appreciate it, man. And look, you do great tracking, and I think that's where it starts here. And I'm very happy we're having you on now, Matt, because last week we had a couple guys on, and I'm a big fan of this player myself. We had Nate Tyson from The Athletic, who does a great job covering the NFL, and he has Drake Mays as number one quarterback. Stephen Ruiz we had on. He has him as his number two quarterback. May's my number two guy. I'm a big Drake May guy. I love his ability to throw over the middle, tight windows, throwing all the physical traits he has. That's great. You have him as your sixth quarterback. So give me the other side of the ledger on why you think he's much more of a developmental player, if I read your breakdown correctly, than he is a guy you can plug and play and have him ready to really contribute right away.
Absolutely. And developmental player for a quarterback is different than developmental player for everybody else, because I think a good way of kind of parsing this is that he has starter upside in a player that's going to need time, because today's NFL, as we know, look, I'm not going to pick on the Giants. I'm going to pick on every team in the league and say this, is that I think that the stats bear out very, very well that the NFL hasn't figured out how to pick, evaluate, and develop quarterbacks.
1,000%. You can't argue it. You can't argue it. It's impossible.
Yeah. So and the problem is that there's a different template for successful development with quarterbacks. There's not just one template for what makes a good quarterback. Brett Favre's is different as Kirk Cousins. So when you look at the history of the game, from Ben Roethlisberger to Drew Bledsoe to Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts. So anyway, when you look at Drake May, I can see how the path for him to becoming a successful starter is there. Like you said, big arm, tough in the pocket. He has all the bullet point physical traits that NFL teams go, I feel at least semi-safe with my job if I pick this guy in the first round, because what's anyone going to do to indict me if he doesn't work out, considering that he went to a big program, had the requisite completion percentage that Bill Parcells did in his little shorthand of what he did for quarterbacks. He shows all the NFL physical traits. The thing is the glue that holds those things together to make a quarterback great, and that teams are starting to realize they need to figure out what to do, is processing speed and pocket management.
Which, by the way, I think processing speed from just without knowing what they're teaching them, I think, for me at least, that's something that's very tough for me to figure out just from watching college tape, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And it is very difficult to figure out. And one of the things that, for me, I think where I've had more and more success over the years with quarterbacks and kind of identifying quarterbacks that were high in the draft that didn't turn out so good because of their processing speed were guys like Zach Wilson, Mitchell Trubisky, Drew Lock. Um, and because, but processing speed is a lot to me like I equate it to stand-up comedy. Okay. Because it's a stage performance thing. You have to have a basic theory of how to be on stage, how to perform, how to use your voice, all the techniques of like presence, voice, using your voice to tell a story, timing, all that. But you also have to be able to riff with the audience, and you have to be able to turn a disadvantageous situation into an advantageous one. And you're incorporating and integrating all these skills to do it. So you could have great material, but if you don't have good timing, that processing speed of like anticipating the opening and landing it with perfect confidence of timing, like you see that leverage with the safety and you go, that's going to break open and the ball's got to come out as soon as you see it. Well, Alex Smith was a great example, bringing back Gil Brandt again, saying, hey, the best pro day I ever saw since, Troy Aikman. But Alex Smith may have had the book smarts and the whiteboard smarts of, say, an economist and maybe a genius comedy writer, who had unbelievably intelligent, funny material. But when it came time to actually delivering the joke with timing, it fell flat too often. And all comedians, like all quarterbacks, bomb. Like they tell bad jokes throughout a set. Whoever your favorite comedian is tells bad jokes. Like you could probably count how many bad jokes Bill Burr has, but the ones he lands are uproarious. And so like I look at it and say the difference between say Alex Smith and Brett Favre would be that Alex Smith had incredibly intelligent material that he couldn't land with timing. Brett Favre made a lot of bad jokes, crass jokes. But some of his fart jokes were actually uproarious, even if you knew they were coming, because the timing was so good you couldn't help but laugh. And that's the thing with quarterbacking that I think is hard to see when you're studying. But if you're looking at coverage and understanding leverage more than like knowing about whether it's a cover three cloud or cover two or cover one and knowing all the terminology of scheme, that's great. But really, when it comes down to it, I would recommend anybody out there who's a diehard football fan to get D-U-B, Maddox, Maddux, Dub Maddox's book, R4, From Headset to Helmet. He is a big time high school coach that my buddy Will Hewlett, who I've done some contributions for, who coached Brock Purdy, coached Anthony Richardson, still coaches him, and did some work with Caleb Williams this year, and has always been known as like a guy that helps get late round quarterbacks an opportunity to be late round quarterbacks until he started getting with these guys. But he recommended to me over 10 years ago, and it's a great understanding of how to read leverage. And all the great quarterbacks, they didn't study with Dub Maddox. They just know, in addition to all the coverage theory, that at the end of the day, it's about seeing it quickly and knowing what they're reading and processing it fast and knowing where the ball needs to come out and where it needs to be placed, and being able to do that also with pre-snap, post-snap tells. So there's a lot of decision-making management and quick reading, and a lot of it's like the NFL right now is still looking at things by whiteboard and book smarts when they need to be incorporating a lot more about timing and confidence of timing and the courage to continue to have that timing when you make a mistake. And those are things that with Drake May, I see him drift in the pocket and invite pressure that he shouldn't. I see throws that are accurate in completion percentage, but not accurate when I chart the difference between receivers having to work for the ball unnecessarily, according to the route and the coverage position, and pinpoint accuracy that Bill Walsh would have defined as pinpoint accuracy. So, and then I see red zone gaps and black zone gaps backed up in your own area. And those are really important areas. So right now, he's that guy that if he were in a different NFL world where there were more Marty Schottenheimers who would say, I'm going to bench you for a while, because you're not seeing the game right. You're seeing ghosts like Sam Darnold did, but instead of telling Adam Gase and he just keeps staring off into the distance, you would have and alienates you. Instead, you would have a Schottenheimer go, I'm going to put the veteran in. if we get close, you're still my guy. I'm going to give you a chance to like see the field again better and slow down and give you another chance. That's exactly what he did with Drew Brees. And I think Drake May needs that, or he may even need a little more of the Jordan Love treatment, who was nowhere ready to start. But you could see in his game that like if this dude figures it out, he could be good. And when he finally got into a Packers lineup as the permanent starter, he had enough intermittent experiences on the field and practice field that you could see that the footwork, the mechanics, the understanding of the offense and defenses were ingrained enough that he wasn't overthinking things. And if you get rushed on the field, your timing slows down because you're overthinking. And then the things that you had ingrained, you're now screwing up because you're thinking about all that, plus that you're in new town and you've got a lot of money and people are asking you tons of questions off the field and there's all this demand and now you're completely discombobulated because the hardest part you haven't even gotten to yet, which is faster, stronger, savvier defenses.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
All right. You have Penix as your second quarterback and Nix as your third one. And I think it's interesting. And you actually go through this with Penix. You talk about in your passage on him, but how you talk to some scouting buddies and they're like, we don't like the way he handles pressure. And that's my thing with him too. I don't think as a guy that he can relocate, but once he's on the move, I just don't like. And I think sometimes he'll just kind of, back foot, get it out quick when he sees pressure in his face. You don't think that's a problem. You have him as your second quarterback, and you have Bo Nix as your third. So why do you think you like those two guys maybe than some of the other analysts out there?
Sure, because I think they're actually, when I look at Penix and especially Indiana tape, he lived with pressure as a second skin there. And he was so good at being able to throw the ball away and get rid of it and just manage situations. And you hear this all the time in the NFL about, and you'll hear coaches even say it to like their big time physical prospects who can work away from the pocket. Like I remember hearing them tell Anthony Richardson this early in the season. They're just, remember, just take the little losses because those are going to lead to big victories. And those little losses are throwing the ball away, and most of those guys have to learn that. He does have his arm talent to make throws off platform is very strong. And I found that he was better at staying in the pocket and didn't break the pocket as much as other guys who we often laud for getting outside the pocket. When they should step up, they should climb and throw. And he's very good at being able to climb and throw and find the open man over the middle. I think he's underrated in that respect when I charted what he was doing for 6 to 8, I think probably 8 games that I charted with that. And it's in addition to watching more both at Indiana and at Washington last year and this year. So I'm a fan of what I see there. Injuries worry people because 2 ACLs, 2 shoulder injuries, but at the same time, you can flip it and say that's going to make him a little bit of a discount, but the percentage risk of injury rising because of that is small. It's not like a 20% rise. It's like a 2% rise, maybe, when you look at that. So at the end of the day, I'd rather have a battle-tested quarterback who didn't, basically Derek Carr or David Carr, in his career in terms of like wilt from the constant pressure. In fact, he got better. And I remember Lamar Jackson and feeling the same way about him and seeing people would talk about his pocket presence. And I'm thinking, this guy's a total anchor in the pocket because of the ability to make efficient movements. Bo Nix is not the most exciting quarterback prospect. I think we'll all agree on that probably. And that's probably why it's a surprise. But I think because of my process, there are a lot of people who look at what May does or JJ McCarthy does or Jalen Daniels does, and they see the upside. And I think they overweigh the upside a little bit. Whereas with Bo Nix, what he does so well is he doesn't make a ton of mistakes. He actually knows his limitations, and his limitations aren't huge. It's the difference between Matt Ryan and Drew Lock. Drew Lock, who I think can turn the corner, actually. I think he's a guy who could, if what we saw in Seattle late in the season, and especially the interview afterward, and I'm getting a little bit in the narrative street rather than analysis here, but I know someone who interviewed Drew Lock's dad, and Drew Lock's dad echoed a lot of the things I mentioned in my original scouting report of him. And um, I thought he could be a talented starter, but he was more in that Drake May school where it's like maybe he needs a little bit more time and put in some of the work. And Drew's, from all reports, is a great guy. You know, great guy. He just was like a lot of young, talented guys who were told they're awesome, and but you need to work on this. And he'd nod his head and go, okay, but didn't really do it because he thought he'd have more time to get there. And then he got to the NFL and realized, oh, time's up. Like I should have been starting this stuff late in high school, but I got by on a lot of my arm talent and a lot of the latent talents that I do have. When you look at Bo Nix, I think he knows what he can and can't do. And instead of maybe having the Drew Lock-esque abilities physically, he's got more Matt Ryan-esque ability. Matt Ryan, Kirk Cousins. And you look at those guys and you go, okay, those guys can go pretty far and give you a lot of production with a good team around you. He moves well in the pocket. He knows when to throw the ball away. When he takes risks, they're not huge risks. They're logical. When he throws the ball across his body, it's a logical decision that he really saw. He got better. I don't think the Auburn receivers did him any favors when I watched him, at least in his last year at Auburn, where I thought he was starting to turn a corner. And so I look at him and go, are you going to get, you know, potential record-breaking years out of this guy? Probably never, unless he's loaded with an all-star team around him. But is he going to give you top 12 to top 15 production and maybe in the first inside like top 6 to top 8 if he's on a good team? I think he's capable of that.
Yeah, I think he's one of the guys that kind of gets the ball out on time, right? He's one of the few guys where the back foot hitting the ball's out. You don't see that with a lot of the other guys. I'm with you. All right, just one more quarterback thing before we head off to a couple different positions. Let me make sure we get to all four of them here. You have Daniels as your fourth guy. Not a surprise. Most of your analysis there, I think, is similar. Talk a little bit about with him and his processing, where I think you see the same thing, where maybe he runs a little bit too early and looks to run before he looks to throw. He doesn't get through all his progressions. And then you have McCarthy at 5, and you talk about him as being a guy that was a challenging evaluation for you.
Absolutely. You know, with Daniels, you know, the thing about him was you could see on the surface why people make Lamar Jackson comparisons. Okay, fast, you know, moves reasonably well in the pocket at times. That big deep arm where he can throw the ball with a lot of loft and get the ball out there. I think he has a little stronger arm than Jackson. I don't think he has anywhere near the pocket management that Jackson has. And his running ability, he's more likely to run into a brick wall than make someone miss at this time.
I agree. I think he's more of a straight ahead runner than he is a side to side elusive guy.
For sure. You would probably say he's more in the Marcus Mariota archetype, not meaning he's trying to be as good as Marcus Mariota. Maybe he's a better prospect than Marcus Mariota, but he's in that archetype of a straight line runner who maybe doesn't see the field as clearly as he should at this stage of his career compared to what Jackson was. And the part of that processing is that he can go to 2 to 3 reads in the field and work across the field. But at some point in his career, my buddy Chad Ryder at NFL.com and I had this conversation recently where it's like, you wonder if he was told by a coach, look, 2 reads and run. If it's not open after 2 reads, just run.
Which, by the way, when you're that fast, it's not the worst plan in the world in college football, to be honest with you.
No, and it was a good first start year for Josh Allen because he needed that his first year, and the Bills were patient with him to do it. But the problem with Daniels is that there are times when he has second and third read opportunities where, say, like there's a crossing route going over a certain coverage and zone, and he should be able to put 2 and 2 together, and that's part of the processing thing. Is 2 and 2 together that this route's going to break open while I'm sitting looking into the right flat. If I wait a couple more beats with the hitches in my step and I'm in a wide open pocket, this is going to come open. But instead, he'll turn just as the route's about to break open and go to another read. And so he has this kind of tragic comedy timing where he didn't see or didn't know that coverage should be, or that route should be breaking open. So he's done that enough. Dak Prescott had that problem early in his career at Mississippi State. So it's not It's not unredeemable, but it needs a little more time. And then McCarthy, the difficult part about McCarthy is that he's the good stuff is that he has really great footwork, which gives him a solid foundation for pocket movement, drops, curtailing drops, making adjustments, and being in a position to throw an accurate pass, which he often does. He's very good in the short and intermediate game. In the range beyond the intermediate game to the deep game, I would call it the vertical and deep game, between say 28 yards and then plus 28 yards plus. You don't see a lot of throws. Now, is that because of the offense he was in? Partially, for sure. But even with the sample size I saw, they weren't accurate.
Yeah, very flat, right? And there's not a lot of arc on him, not a lot of touch, and things sail. And you even saw it, I think, at his combine workout where his deep passes early were sailing out of bounds towards the sideline.
Exactly. So you had issues with that. And then there's the processing thing. I had a quarterback coach ask me, is he Zach Wilson 2.0 back in November? And I said, that sounds strong, right? And I said, now, if you look at it as Zach Wilson iteration 2.0, as in like Apple coming out with a new iPod, 2.0, 3.0, then the answer
is you're dating yourself, Matt.
I am.
These kids don't know what iPods are.
I know, exactly. I still got a record player in here with DVDs. So, that, or I just watch YouTube. But, the thing is it's more of that where Zach Wilson had only lows in his processing from what I observed and with tracking of his accuracy and pocket movement. They're only lows. The things that people saw as highs, I saw that's what any NFL contract quarterback has to do. That's like the bare minimum. And then what I'm expecting him to do to be a starter, it's only lows. Whereas with JJ McCarthy, there's some lows with processing and sometimes even pocket movement and especially red zone decision making and black zone decision making. But there's also some real highs that you don't see from players who just have lows. So that's the hard part, is that if the deeper part of the game is there, if he can correct the immaturity of decisions he has in the red zone and backed up in his own area that play guys like Trubisky and Locke and Cutler, talented guys, and he can process, just have more highs and fewer lows in terms of seeing when to get balls out into tight coverage, he could be something. But right now, he's more, to me, like my comp for him is in the style of player like Jake Plummer, where like you could get Pro Bowl Jake Plummer with a good team like the Broncos, and he's really hitting on all cylinders, and you see why Bill Walsh loved him, as a prospect. Or you could get Arizona Jake Plummer, where he tries to do too much and he's frenetic and he makes plays that you're just like, you look so good for like 2.5 quarters and look what you just did,
I agree. I think he's probably more volatile than I think people tend to talk about him. Final follow-up on the quarterbacks, not even an individual player. I found, and much like you, I go through this every year and I learn things about quarterbacks and I figure out how to think about them. One thing that I think I know about NFL quarterbacks, if you want to be successful, you have to be able to get the ball into relatively small areas in the middle of the field. You cannot live on the perimeter. You have to be able to have the confidence to let it go into crowded areas with anticipation and accuracy to get at the players in the middle of the field. That's where you're going to do your damage, right? Is that an important thing for you when watching these college guys? Is that something you think can get improved on a lot in the pros, or is that something that is kind of ingrained, being able to navigate that middle of the field mess, for lack of a better term, in college in order for that to translate to the pros? Because that's one thing I do think Drake May is very good at. You look at his heat map and his targeting locations, like his middle of the field is bright red. Like he just that targets that 10 to 25 area middle of the field, and he's pretty efficient at it too. So I wonder how much that goes into your evaluation when you look at these quarterbacks.
Absolutely, because I chart every game. And see, the difference I think I would say between heat map and how I chart is that heat map still is looking at completion percentage accuracy and not pass placement. And I'm looking at pass placement with a very strict level of definitions, which is why like there are a lot of people who like Baker Mayfield and said, well, look at his accuracy percentage. Look what he did. Look at how, and I said, if you look at what he did against man-to-man coverage in the middle of the field, it was lacking. He was late. He was behind. Maybe the receivers made catches, but he made them pay unnecessarily. And then you saw Odell Beckham and his daddy and how that turned out in Cleveland with Baker. Because you could turn on games like, say, University of Georgia game in the Rose Bowl with Baker Mayfield, and you go, ooh, he was like 2 beats late. He fit the ball in there, but he made it such a tougher play. And in the NFL, it's not going to be one step ahead in coverage. It's going to be a half a shoulder ahead in coverage. And that's where the projection part has to come in, is that your overlay, your template or standard of evaluating that middle of the field, which you're so dead on right about. And it is an ingrained thing. And I'll mention that in a second. That has to be there. You have to look at it and go, hey, that heat map, a lot of those passes were 1 to 2 steps and it looks tight, but really it 3rd and 15 and Jalen Ramsey's on you, and DeAndre Hopkins is yelling at you because you didn't target him because he had half a shoulder free. That's the difference between a guy who gets a chance to start and a guy who gets a second contract. And so with May, that's where I'm concerned about, is because a lot of those throws were technically accurate on the way we look at completion percentage, but when you chart and say what's pinpoint and what's general accuracy, like receiver should have made the effort to catch it, even though it was a harder effort, so that there's a difference there. But the ingrained part, all of what you talked about to me is processing. That's how you study processing. And for me, like Brock Purdy, I didn't rate him as an all-star, but I had him as my 6th rated quarterback who I thought had a chance to become a potential starter with some time and work. Well, when you get onto an all-star team, you get a chance to level up fast because everybody's doing exactly what they need to do. That doesn't happen in the NFL at that level. So it's like playing with great jazz musicians, and you're an aspiring jazz musician. You're going to sound better because everything that you're told supposed to happen, you don't have to overthink about. It's already happening, and it reinforces good habits. So with the problem with processing is that, and this middle of the field reading, is that it's like being a musician who has ingrained the wrong habits for so long that you have to strip it all down and build it back up. And in the NFL, they're not developing you. The NFL, we all know this now. We should all know this, is that they're coaching to scheme, they're coaching for game plan, and it takes a lot of time, and they expect you to do that development on your own. Maybe position coaches will say, hey man, you need to work on this stuff. You got to get better on this. They may point you in a direction of a coach if you don't already have one, which most of them do. And they may even suggest some things, but more often than not, they're like, look, I expect you to be able to do this stuff. Get better, figure it out, do it right. And that's and a lot of these position coaches, as good as they are and as good as they become, they weren't quarterbacks. Maybe they were defensive ends. Maybe they were a quality control coach in a different area. So it's hard to unlearn and relearn processing. In the same way, it's hard to unlearn and relearn stepping up in the pocket if you've been hit in the face by 325 pounders so many times. It would be like putting your hand in a window. If you get hit a couple times, working as a contractor and the window slams down on your hand and you bust your hand, if it happens once a month, you're probably like a little wary, but you're okay with sticking your hand in a windowsill. But if you got kidnapped by some sadistic person and they put your hand in the window and they slammed it over and over again, like over a period of hours, and like crushed your hand, you're going to be David Carr, and you're going to try to put your hand in the window, you're going to be unconsciously like shaking and quivering, even if you've like got the courage to do it. And that's the difference between ingrained and behaviors that are hard to unlearn.
I wonder if that's what it's been like playing behind the Giants offensive line for the last 10 years. The Giants Huddle podcast is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants, from game day to every day. Citizens is made ready for Giants fans with insights, guidance, and solutions. Learn more at citizensbank.com. All right, Matt, let's move over to the running back position. Actually, let's do wide receiver first. I think Giant fans are into that. And we're going to go long today, folks. I'm just warning you. So I hope you have a long run or a lot of chores around the house, because we got stuff to get to here. You have Neighbors, the Dunze, and Harrison is your 1 through 3 in that order. You have them all as 90+ grades in your book, which is they're going to be star players. So I don't even want to waste a lot of time on those guys because you all know they're
Good.
awesome. They're great in their own way. Let's skip them. Xavier Worthy at 4. And I love the fact that you have him there, but you don't have him there because of his 40 time. Why do you like Xavier Worthy so much as you think a guy that could be a number 1 star wide receiver in the league?
Because he's more than just a straight line route runner who just gets open off play action and behind people. Like he's what the Giants said, hey, this is why we think Jalen Hyatt's more than just a deep threat. We think, or he can become more than a deep threat. Maybe that's the better way to phrase that.
Right.
I think Xavier Worthy already is more than a deep threat. He runs routes in the middle of the field that are worthwhile. He can create separation, and he can make the tough plays in tight coverage and get ping-ponged by defenders in the middle of the field where he bounces off a linebacker into a safety on a tight window throw and makes the catches. Now, you're going to hear about how he fights the ball, and he does sometimes. He sometimes has some little juggles when he fights the ball in some situations, but he has far more catches than drops. He has far more instances of displaying strong technique. And the lapses he has, I think, are small enough that you can deal with in this. I mean, look, Brandon Marshall dropped a lot of balls. He ran good routes. He was tough. Or Cortland Sutton even is that guy that, it's like, feed me. And that I'm going to eventually get it to you. I think Xavier Worthy's better than even that. And so when I look at his game overall, he's more in that archetype of an Isaac Bruce or a Deshaun Jackson, small but fast, tough, can protect himself, but when he has to take a hit, he can make the play, and he's not just an outside boundary guy, who runs behind you. He can do the back shoulder work. He times his positions well. You can be big and not time your position well and get good position. You look at Colin Johnson, New York Giant, one of the things that I would, if I were good enough to be a wide receiver coach on this level, and I had Colin Johnson as a client, I'd say, listen, Colin, you've got this great size. You've got to work on timing your extensions to the ball, because when you position yourself, you need to go straight up and down so that you use that height and length to catch the ball at the highest point, and your back is to the defender. What you do is you do this unbelievably impressive reverse swan dive, where you're leaning backwards and you're extending way behind you at the late window to catch it, which is unbelievably impressive physically, but you've opened your chest and whole catch area to the opponent unnecessarily. And you also have no control to land and get in bounds. And that was that's what he did at Texas. Xavier Worthy doesn't do that. So yeah, he's definitely up there.
All right, you got Brian Thomas at 5, Keon Coleman at 6. Again, I think that's fairly common, so we won't spend a ton of time on those guys. I love Ricky Pearsall at 7. We have not talked about him a bunch on these podcasts, and boy, I haven't dug into his tape deeply yet, but I watched him down at the Senior Bowl, and no one could cover the guy. Route running, speed, hands, very natural catching the football. Why do you have him at 7, which I think is probably a little bit higher than what a lot of other people do?
In addition to all those things that you mentioned, and to a high degree, that's probably the meat of it right there. Because he can release against man, he can work against zone, he can play outside and inside. And when I was high on Anthony Richardson, he was my QB1, CJ Stroud, I think QB2. And when you look at those guys, Anthony Richardson, I always said, was a better processor of information than people gave him credit for. I think Chris Ballard pretty much validated that they were surprised at how good of a processor he was compared to what the consensus was saying. And he was so good in the pocket, staying in the pocket to make plays. Well, the guy who worked with him off structure or for second reads or route adjustments, that he was his go-to guy, was Ricky Pearsall. I would love to see Ricky Pearsall reunited with Anthony Richardson just for that reason, because they have such a rapport. But he can win deep. He can win over the middle. He can win as a fly sweep guy around, as an aerial artistry that I would joke, and this is a little twisted, but I think you've heard enough of me now to know that I probably am and know what I do. So, we'll have a good laugh about it, right? So the thing is I used to joke that, like, if I won the Powerball that I would probably like, and I just decided to drop out of society and I could buy an island, for instance, I would buy an island and I would dedicate my life's work to holding an aerial catch invitational, kind of like the NFL's version of the slam dunk contest, and have them be covered by guys. And that it would be called the Brandon Lloyd Aerial Invitational, because I thought Brandon Lloyd, while he had a very up and down career, had this like was maybe God's gift to aerial catching, So, give him an opportunity to like give him some props, but like, yeah, I think Ricky Pearsall would be like one of the top 3 candidates this year to win the Brandon Lloyd Aerial Invitation sponsored by the RSP on my deserted island.
All right, then how about Jermaine Burton? We know he has some off the field stuff. That's not part of your equation. But why do you think he's being underrated as a receiver for an Alabama program whose passing game really didn't take off until the second half of the year this season?
That's one of the reasons, is that people do look at the stats and they look at the production, and they have production models, and sometimes people they don't see the production model as a layer, they see it as the answer. Just in the same way that there was an NFC team, your rival, one of your arch rivals, that basically thought, oh, we should just get 6'2", 210-pound receivers because they're productive. This was back in the Des Bryant days, and towards the end of that, and say that should be our disqualifier. Anybody under 6'2", anybody like Steve Smith, Odell Beckham Jr., Tyreek Hill, yep, forget about them. Let's not even look at them. We're just only going to look at 6'2", 210-pound receivers. And there are NFL teams that use that type of a model. So when you look at Burden, they may look at production models and go, ooh, this particular year didn't work out well, and we're a little bit further down on him. But he's a Robert Woods type of quiet assassin player, in the sense of he can play all 3 positions. He can earn position against the boundary. He can work the middle. He has nuance with his route running. He has enough speed to be that outside threat, but also enough toughness to win in tight coverage. And he is nasty as a player. And you like that as a layer on top of everything. I'm not going to just look for nasty players, because there are a lot of bad, nasty players.
Huh.
But, but when I look at players and they do all the technical things well, and they conceptually understand all 3 roles and can perform them, and on top of it, they're a dog when they block people, and they have a bit of an attitude, but they don't make mistakes as a result of that too often, then I'm like, yeah, I want that guy. I want Steve Smiths on my team all day long, And if Jermaine Burton's got a little bit of Steve Smith in him, that's good.
Yeah, I agree. All right, one guy that I got to be honest with you, Matt, I have not watched him yet, and I've watched probably 20 wide receivers in this draft class.
Nice.
And watched them in great detail. Aeneas Smith, you have him ranked as your 11th wide receiver. Tell me about him.
Yeah, he came to Texas A&M as a running back. Okay. And he was splitting time with Isaiah Spiller, the Chargers draft pick. More of an outside runner, more of a DeAndre Swift type. Like, you don't want him running inside zone or making zone decisions. You want him just like, here's the whole meat, just hit it fast, and let's get you into space as quick as possible. He was kind of that guy. So they made him a wide receiver. And if you didn't know he was a running back, you would have thought he was a top prospect as a wide receiver, the way he runs routes and the way he catches the football. Sharp breaks, good setups with good control of his pacing to really bait defenders efficiently. Makes tough catches, high-low, away from his frame. Tight hands technique, not clap attacking targets so that they recoil off of his hand and he has to fight the ball or they go through it. It's solid in his hands in all forms of ways. Takes contact. And then in the open field, he looks like a running back. You know who that was back in the day? Golden Tate at Notre Dame, when he was a running back, and then he became a receiver, and then slowly developed into really one of the better slot receivers who could also play outside and get deep as a flanker. And he had some peak years in Detroit and in New York, and you guys know exactly what that is. His problem, and why he might fall out of the draft, is that he had an ACL tear 2 years ago. He looks fully recovered from that. Looks great. But he also got busted for a DWI, and in the same bust for possession of marijuana and a firearm charge.
Well, that's not the best.
The firearm charge, I look at that and say, just get a license. You can get a license. Get a license
Especially
to
in
carry.
Texas.
Yeah,
Especially in Texas.
especially exactly, especially in Texas. So whether you agree with guns or not, it's legal in Texas. He should have been able to get it's the DWI that was the big deal. And so if he's grown up, shown the ability, shown on all accounts through really good interviewing to know and background checks that he's matured, then he may get drafted, or he'll at least be given a good contract as a UDFA and could grow from there.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New you moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
All right, two guys I want to touch on before we hit the running backs and tight ends here. Not as high on AD Mitchell, who I love as a tools guy, who has some maturing to do, I think, in terms of the art of playing the receiver. And by the way, I should point out that you probably have up to 15 guys that you think are plug-and-play starters in this draft. You are in the consensus that this is a really good wide receiver class. So you have Mitchell and Roman Wilson, I believe, is right below that tier, if I'm not mistaken. Why
I
maybe
do.
are you not on high as those two guys as some other people are?
Sure. When I look at AD Mitchell, is that I see him more as that good vertical receiver who could eventually become a productive secondary starter in the NFL, that number 2 receiver, number 3 in base 3 receiver sets. But his short and intermediate route game needs work. And that's the area where the different, in a different class, with his grade, I mean, I still have him as a plug and play starter. I mean, like he'd be top 5 in a lot of classes.
Yeah. Great class.
Yeah, it's an amazing class. And now I always tell everybody, look, if I tell you there's 18 receivers that could plug and play start, you got to divide that number by the fudge factor of injury, maturity, bad fit. And you're probably going to get 4 players out of that. 3 probably, really. So he has to refine his release packages against man-to-man coverage. But he doesn't apply counters as strongly as he needs to. The footwork doesn't attack the leverage of opponent deep enough to sell the effectiveness of the counters. Like he performs the move right now, but the artistry of the move isn't NFL quality just yet. So he's gonna get that rude awakening to go, oh, you mean like I've got to use pacing? You mean I've got to attack deeper into the man? Like I got to really get into the man's body to sell this move? He uses speed very well and baits them. But his breaks just need to get better. And the way he employs his attack, there's a lot of jump through balls that look impressive where he jumps up to catch them. Like Colin Johnson can jump up and catch, but I talk about him leaning backwards. The problem with AD Mitchell isn't that. It's that he's using underhand attack on a ball he should have high pointed early. And when you put your hands here and you're jumping above a man in front of you, you're giving that man a chance to defend the ball,
Sure.
Whereas you're giving the man no chance when you have your hands over your head. Things like that got to get better. Roman Wilson, same thing. He's that guy who knows all the techniques. He has a lot of them in his toolbox, but has no conceptual idea of when to apply them based on the coverage and the artistry in which to sell them effectively. He's like talking monotone. He sounds like Tom Shane in those old jewelry commercials where he's like, "Hi, I'm Tom Shane." And
Ben Stein, right?
Ben Stein, that kind of stuff. Sometimes me when I'm tired, but it's like that is that kind of thing where it's just monotone and defenders it's going to be predictable. And so he's got to work on that so that he can get open against man. Against zone, he can help out right now. But against man, he's not a matchup receiver, and matchup receivers are starters.
Giants fans love a winner. It's why they love Citizens, named a 2022 best bank in the U.S. by The Banker as the official bank of the Giants and sponsor of the Huddle. Citizens is made ready for fans of Big Blue. Learn more at citizensbank.com. All right, looking at your running back capsules here, I believe Brooks out of Texas is your only guy that you think is kind of a full-time plug-and-play running back. And then you have a group of about, 10 or 12 that are, play a role as a rotational starter, which is what my read on the class is too. So let's start with some of these guys that we haven't talked about a ton here. You like Dylan Johnson a lot out of Washington. I watch him, and I'm not sure if I see enough juice and explosive ability, but you seem to think that there's a role for him. Why do you like Dylan Johnson out of Washington?
Yeah, and I'm a sucker for guys like that, like the Spencer Wares, Peyton Barbers, hard-running guys who who are smart and versatile in terms of blocking schemes. They can really manipulate most blocking schemes very well, and pass protect, but maybe they lack a top gear. I think his acceleration is fine to get into the second level. And he did play hurt all year. So, I mean, with leg injuries
He
that were
did.
pretty tough. He was getting acupuncture pretty much like couple times a week, every week since the middle of the season. And he played well through. He breaks a lot of tackles. And he's efficient in how in his movement. I expect him to be a late round pick at best, maybe a UDFA. But what I expect is that he will wind up impressing in camp because he'll be fully healthy. And I'll go, this guy's got a little bit more pop to his game than I expected. Kind of like how Chris Brooks, I had rated number 10 last year, and he went to the Dolphins, and you watch him in mop-up duty against the Broncos, and you're like, that guy's pretty good, you know? Or an Isaiah Pacheco, who I had rated higher than most. And and he was fast, but I was like, you don't understand. Like, he played behind a Rutgers line that was like that, you're running gap plays and you're beating your center to the line of scrimmage. When that's happening, you're not having success because gap plays, there's only one hole. And if your lead blocker can't even get there on time, you're going to have to create. So when he gets to the NFL, it's actually going to be easier for him. He's going to be like, wait a minute, you mean the hole's there? I don't have to do anything weird to get there. So I think that Dylan Johnson's one of those players that you're going to go, oh, he was working with anvils around his ankles for for most of the season.
And then the other guy that you really like is Kamani Vidal, who I watched at one of the All-Star games out of Troy. He is your 6th ranked running back. Tell me why.
Because there's backs who may have more draft capital cred, because they went to bigger schools, they're bigger, they're stronger, or they're faster, but they don't have the big, strong, fast package that he has, in addition to the fact that he's also a good decision maker, and he's a heck of a pass protector. In addition to that, he's fast. And when you watch him play, he's got a pretty complete game. I would joke that, when people were all excited about DeAndre Swift at Detroit because he was highly productive, they're seeing a space player. We already talked about how he's a space player who, if he's on a great team with a great running quarterback, you can create box advantages for him. But he's not a complete running back, in that level. But people thought he was it for a time. Fans did, at least. I think they were looking at DeAndre Swift, and what they were actually seeing was the future of Kamani Vidal if he lands in a good opportunity, and gets to work his way into that opportunity and show what he can do. He's a savvier DeAndre Swift who's more complete.
Okay, I love the fact that you have Will Shipley at 7, by the way. I think he's being overlooked. I think he's a really fun player.
Yeah.
But we've talked about him a lot. Blake Watson out of Memphis, if someone that we have not discussed a ton on these shows. So I think he just ran a 4.4 at his pro day the other day. You're a big fan.
Absolutely, and he's, Will Shipley, Dylan Lobby, and Blake Watson are all kind of in the same grouping for me. And I would say Shipley's the best overall route runner. Lobby's the best at positioning himself on deep routes and probably the better inside runner and a very dynamic mover. Blake Watson, to me, has the best hands of the three, like the hand-eye coordination. And I think he's the best runner of the three in terms of working between the tackles, and also explosion in the open field. And he has good contact balance for his size. He kind of reminds me of a guy that I thought was about 8 years ahead of his time for the league, and that was Gio Bernard. If Gio Bernard played for the Chargers 8 years later than he did, he'd be Austin Eckler. I think he'd even be arguably a better Austin Eckler. But the Bengals were like, we want a big back, and we're just going to let you do what we need you to do, and you'll help us out when our big back gets injured. But Blake Watson could be a Gio Bernard type of player. At worst, he's a better version of what we saw from Chase Edmonds.
Awesome. All right, 2 guys that I really like. I'm a big Ray Davis guy, and I know he's right in your second tier. I just think he does everything pretty well. I think he's just a really solid player. Want to get your take on him, why maybe he wasn't a little bit higher. And then you have Marshawn Lloyd a little bit lower on your list. Is that just the ball security thing, why he's down towards the bottom?
Biggest reason is ball security. If it gets better, and it could, it's just an unpredictable thing. We don't know whether it's David Wilson and or Tiki Barber and it gets better, or whether it's Stevan Ridley and it stays bad, it gets worse, or Sony Michel and it was awful at Georgia, not a problem at New England. So if it gets better, he might have been one of my top 3 running backs. And I pretty much state that in my scouting report. He has some immaturity with bouncing plays outside. He shouldn't, but a lot of backs do that. With
some of his vision,
explosion.
I think, sometimes can be a little,
little hero. I got to make a play ball type of thing that people can grow out of, but sometimes they don't either. So 2 unpredictable things. And then the other guy that
Ray Davis.
Oh yeah, Ray Davis is fun, man.
He's fun to watch. I
Yeah.
I think he's my 3rd running back. I just think I don't know if he's ever going to be a star, but if he's your starter, you're going to get good solid play from him for 16 games.
Without a doubt. And I think, his score for me is a rotational contributor. Like, to me, think Travis Henry. If you guys remember Travis Henry, he runs like that. He's just not as big as Travis. He runs like he's 220, but he's really only in the mid 200s, like 205, 206, I think, maybe 210. But his pass catching is okay. Is like a check down player, leak receiver. Yep. The pass pro needs work. That's where he's really that's what limited him. If his pass pro were better, he would be up there probably among my top 5 guys. That's why the margin of error is so small between my 3rd guy and my 12th guy. Right. It's those 1 to 2 things. And oftentimes it's pass pro where he just misses guys or misreads certain blitz types that it's going to cost him a year to get on the field, because if he doesn't improve it quickly and really get it, he's only going to be a situational guy at best, and it's going to be one of those situational guys where it's like you're going to get 3 touches or 3 snaps or 5 snaps in this game, as opposed to we're going to make sure you get 8 to 10 touches in the game, which is where eventually I think he'll at least be.
All right, let's jump to tight ends here. You love Brock Bowers, so does everybody. Yeah. So we can move on from that. He's awesome. Yeah. Beyond that, I don't know if you had another guy with a starter grade in your tight end group, but I didn't look where Ben Sinnott was for you. But I love myself some Ben Sinnott. I'm a big fan. He's your number 2 tight end. I was thrilled to see it. So you can join me on the soapbox. Tell the folks why Ben Sinnott is awesome.
Okay. If you're when you were a kid and you saw a heavy bag for the first time, maybe in your uncle's garage or in the basement, and you hit it for the first time, you thought it was going to be soft. It has a little give, right? But then you felt like you broke your wrist because you didn't know how to punch.
Right.
Ben Sinnott, when he runs, the way tacklers hit him, he looks like they bounced off a heavy bag. Like they just rammed into it and went, oh man, there's like an iron core inside this thing. He's packed tightly that way. He's also very agile and can leap over you, bounce off multiple hits and run through wraps and carry you downfield. He gives you a little bit of that Mark Bavaro vibe back in the day. And I'm in the right place, like in terms of running the football. He's not as big as Bavaro probably was relative to the size of tight ends from now until then. He's more of a move tight end. But he's a good route runner, very precise with his turns, so he can make sharp breaks. He's got a little snap with his turns, so that's important for underneath routes, because that you're going to be covered tightly. He catches the ball with very strong technique on top of that, so he can work those intermediate seams. He can work a little bit outside on you too with his release work, but he can also be that guy that you can line up in line, get a ball over the middle, and he's going to get more yards for you than what the quarterback completed. And overall, I love this guy. And his balance is just great. He's watch him against Iowa State and Kansas on YouTube. You can go there if you want to. I mean, I got all 22 tape, but if you want to see highlights, that's what I'm recommending. You can go there, and he looks like a snowplow. I mean, these games in bad weather, and he literally looks unaffected the way that he moves in those things, and people slipping and sliding all over the place. So that's a fun little tidbit too with him.
All right, final question. You have Stover at 3 among your tight ends, and Jatavian Sanders all the way down at number 4. Just take us those 3 guys and why maybe Sanders is a little bit low on your list than some other people.
Yeah, Sanders needs to work on his breaks, because he's going to be relied upon or seen as a potential matchup receiver against man-to-man coverage. So his breaks, the physical ability to do it's there, the technical ability to do it consistently at the right moment, time, and depth is not at this stage. he is a great pass catcher. He tracks the ball very well, and he's a good runner after the catch. So he's still a guy I think that could contribute early. He's just not as high as Sano. And then, looking at who was the other guy you just mentioned?
Stover.
Stover, yeah. Oh God, I like Stover. Stover is like, we always joke around. You always hear people joke around in commentary in games where it's like the linebacker or the defensive back drops an interception. You go, well, that's why they play defense. Well, when you watch Ben Stover, or excuse me, Cade Stover, and you watch him catch a football, you go, that's why they moved him to tight end, because that dude catches a ball like a veteran. I mean, I see so many guys at this level. It's hard. When you watch kids catch a ball for the first time, they're toddlers, and you throw the big bouncy ball at them, and they clap their hands exaggerated and it goes off their head. There's like a Twitter meme for that, an X meme for that.
I have a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old at home. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly. Well, Cortland Sutton still does that sometimes, as much as I pick on him. Okay. And it's hard to do, but I'll give him credit. It's hard to do when you're high pointing a ball, and you're in tight coverage and having to leap, and you got to get your hands up. It's hard sometimes to stop your momentum and get your hands up straight and tight. You got to bring them up, and you bring them up wide. If the timing's not perfect, you're going to clap onto the ball or completely miss it, especially if you're working a dig route or an over route across the middle and the ball's high. That's really hard to get the hands tight like that. Cade Stover does it. He does it consistently. Like, I don't see targets where he clap attacks very often. His hands are so tight, and they're in difficult situations where he's extending early to the ball. He often seems to be like extending to the earliest point to attack the ball. So when you do that and have good technique and it hits your fingertips, you get a soft recoil if you don't get it immediately. And that soft recoil leads to good second chance opportunities. If it hits your palms, it's like hitting the broadside of a palm. Just take a football and throw it up against a wall. And that's what happens when a ball hits your palms.
Yeah.
You're going to get a violent recoil like a knuckleball, and it's very hard to catch. And Cade Stover eliminates a lot of those opportunities, and he's niftier you expect in the open field. This dude's going to be, I think, a more dynamic version of Hunter Henry when he gets it all together.
I like it. Matt, before we say goodbye, one more time, tell the folks where they can find the Scouting RSP.
Yeah, Matt Waldman's rookie scouting portfolio is at mattwaldman.com. You can order it there. It's downloadable in PDF format, fully bookmarked. Choose your own adventure. You'll be pleasantly shocked.
And you'll get through the almost 1,200 pages quickly. A lot of them are charts and lists and stuff. So don't be Matt made this point earlier. Don't be that intimidated by it. It is very accessible. And if you're a fantasy football player, by the way, it is a great resource as well. So make sure you guys go check that out. For Matt Waldman, I'm John Schmeelk. Thanks for joining us on the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. See you next time, everybody.